Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important conference. I've crossed out most of what I was going to say because time is very short. In preparing for today, I was hugely impressed by the report from 2022. Some of the data in that and the analysis I think is absolutely first class and says so much about the state of the construction industry in Pakistan. And as I think we've heard already, 97% of construction contracts in Pakistan often have some form of dispute. But only 8% of them involve sums of over 500 million rupees, which is not actually very much. Most, as you've heard, of the international style of contracts feature the PIDW form of contract, but a very old edition, not the current one. And the importance of the current one, as again was said just now, is that it doesn't have a dispute adjudication board, far less a dispute avoidance and adjudication board. The PIDW procedure for contracts that do have such provisions is that first there is a decision from an engineer which is not accepted by a contractor. That leads to a notice of dissatisfaction and triggers the involvement of the board, usually 3 persons selected for their impartiality and expertise at the start of the contract. The board members are paid a monthly retainer and are expected to visit the project on a regular basis and are there and therefore are up to date if and when disputes or problems turn into disputes. The important new feature is that the board will provide recommendations when requested to solutions and solutions to problems before those problems turn into disputes. The result of that is that the board will probably have fewer disputes to deal with, and therefore this form of multi-tiered procedure is intended to avoid rather than encourage the creation of disputes. So that's the purpose of it, and the whole process has to be completed in a period of 84 days, which is relatively fast, but not as fast as I'll say in a moment, the alternatives, as far as I'm concerned. You can play around with this. You can make a requirement that before anything happens, senior named representatives of the parties have to have a discussion and try to see if they can settle it. You can undoubtedly involve and should involve mediation provisions. And you can have what PIDW calls an amicable settlement attempt. So all of these can be added to the mix. The Islamabad court has looked at issues relating to compliance with such pre-arbitral steps in a PIDW construction contract and concluded that any attempt to bypass these procedures should be discouraged, not permitted, which is, again, a good example of court support for the processes of ADR. However, there is a big cautionary note that our first speaker was absolutely right to emphasize. The size of the project. It's all very well if the project is for $100 million, you can afford a dispute board. You probably can't afford a dispute board for much less. One of the PIDW president list of adjudicators has provided a very useful costing for a 3-person board in place for 24 months. If you take the monthly retainers over that period, you're talking nearly $470,000. He estimates that each dispute, if and when it comes along, will cost $200,000 on top. Now, I had some knowledge of a very large dispute board, which ran over 5 years, a very high-value metro project. There were a total of 58 individual disputes that the board looked at over a 3-year period. On my calculation, the cost of that DAB would comfortably exceed $12 million. So your project needs to be for a very large sum of money if you're going to really get into proper use of dispute boards. Those are the main points I wanted to make about multi-tiered dispute resolution procedures, but I did want to just end with a couple of comments endorsing the opening comments about the genuine support and encouragement of the judiciary in the construction sector. I think it is absolutely critical to the reduction of disputes that the judiciary support. I would offer one or two very humble suggestions. In addition to the repeal of the 1940 Arbitration Act, I think it might be useful to look at the 1872 Contract Act, which I understand permits something called pay when paid clauses. Now that pay when paid clauses, in my experience, are a recipe, a breeding ground for disputes. So I would say that that's an area that would be great if you could get rid of it. The other thing I think that's worth considering is, as has been done in a number of common law jurisdictions, the introduction of statutory, so the legislature's got to be involved, statutory fast-track adjudication. Give contractors and owners, employers, a statutory right to refer any dispute to fast-track 28-day adjudication by a nominated or appointed adjudicator. The decision is temporally binding pending subsequent litigation or arbitration. And here comes the bit for the courts. The courts, certainly in the UK, have restricted their involvement to the process of enforcing adjudicators' decisions if the losing party fails to comply with the decision. And the courts in the UK have said there are only two grounds that we will not enforce: exceeding your jurisdiction as adjudicator or breach of the rules of natural justice. Those are the only two grounds. And I think anything that the judiciary can do to discourage parties that go to ADR ending up in litigation is to be encouraged.